needed when you do have those weapons available, which any player of any Covenant can use. There are these spears, these hammers, and these other anima orbs that are located all around the dungeon that are extremely, extremely powerful and just do absurd amounts of damage in addition to potentially stuns or silence effects, depending on which weapon you're using. Here we go, though, back into game once again with the right affixes, which, as you can see, are Fortified, Raging, and Storming. And there is Golden Guardians with that massive pull onto the first boss.
So we see the Pride Mob just spawning while this whole pool is happening right there for Golden Guardians. They have the Pride Mob plus the boss at this point. And while this whole pool was happening, Yoda actually jumped over to that Goliath, making sure he activates it. And now they're picking up the orbs so they can finish off the boss. But Shakib going down, unfortunately, it is the battle rest for them as well. So this might be an issue as they have to somehow get him back up. There we go. Oh, never mind. He is playing Windwalker, not DK, my bad. So they had to use the engineering rest anyway. Did manage to get him back up. And still, this is very difficult for them as they still have to finish up that Pride as well, missing that damage from the Windwalker.
Yeah, Lighty has been able to save his Last Resort cheat death proc, but Yoda was unable to do that. When he cast that engineering res soon thereafter, it cost him his cheat. So they've used quite a few resources here on that little mishap, but it is still working out nicely for them in terms of just how much they've been able to accomplish here with their very first pull of the dungeon. Getting this boss with all the trash and then the Pride at the same time, they are making a lot of stuff happen in a very short amount of time here. Yeah, you can see, though, just how much of disruption that storming is causing for this team that all wants to be standing in melee, right? Even their ranged players, even their Fire Mage and their Priest, the Boon of the Ascended, you got to be in melee to make full use of that. Fire Mages, if you want to get full shifting power damage, which isn't too much damage, not a big deal if you miss it, but a little bit extra damage. All of that, you're going to need to get into range for those storming tornadoes to cause you a problem. As you can see here, Golden Guardians take care of the first boss, Mind Soothe the Necromancer there, and they're able to walk through here. We're going to have Lighty activating this Goliath. This is a almost full Kyrian team here, so they have a lot of different stewards that they can use here, and it's a question of just which ones they actually decide to pop to activate each of these Goliaths.
So actually pretty big pull that they're doing here. They're pulling 3 packs together. We do have this Necromancer that they have to deal with. Once the Necromancer dies, he's just going to kill all of the ads that are related to that trash pack. So just a bunch of single target damage that you can do. But because they've also pulled the other trash on top, they're just AoEing everything down. As the pack died, not only that Sorcerer and the Bone Mender left. So a huge amount of damage coming in by the Golden Guardians. They also had that orb buff as well from the Goliath, which just helped them out. That's why they're all standing in melee, because that aura, the buff that you get from the Goliath, is just a damage aura around you, so you want to make sure that you stand in melee even if you're a ranged DPS.
Yeah, you can see their management of this prideful, those boasts, the 4-direction one, they're kind of setting up stacking of the players that don't have it on top of each other so that they can avoid that stun, which is nasty. It actually went off during that first boss fight as well, which is part of what started causing them problems, was that a couple players got hit by the stunning bolt there. They're able to make good work of that Pride, though, and this is the second Pride of the dungeon, and it's the second one that they've decided not to skip. So they're going to use this Pride buff on their next pull here. Let's see how big they decide to go as they're getting ready to cross this bridge here. Yoda entering stealth and potentially maneuvering ahead. Nope, just staying still. They're going to actually be doing a pull here rather than any sort of skip. So they're looking to get a lot of count done. They have a nice, big, juicy health target there in that Marrogar model guy. I forget his name. That has, it's something that they can primary target off of now. They need to make sure that they're able to group everything up here. And they're, wow.
Big pull.
That's a lot of mobs. What is Yoda doing? Okay, Yoda's used a weapon. Yoda, I promise, has used a weapon of some kind. Yeah. That is.
I think Yoda has the orb picked up because I didn't see it on Lighty, so I was figuring maybe they have used the orb on the previous pull, but it didn't look like it. So it was surely Yoda that picked up that orb and was doing this huge amount of AoE damage here to that pack. That's what allowed them to do this insane pull, as they're also proccing the third Pride mob, as they are on 67% trash percentage. And I'm pretty sure we're gonna see the same thing, or a similar pull at least, happening for that Gargoyle stream as well. So they are a little bit behind on their side, as they're just now popping that second Pride boss, and we'll see if they deal with it as well on their side. Yes, they are. And yeah, just doing the same thing, just everything a little bit slower for that Gargoyle stream.
Yeah, about 20% trash and a pride's worth of health now separating these two teams. As you can see, actually, for Gargoyle, they are sending out their rogue on a stealth mission here of some kind, maybe triggering the RP up ahead while the rest of the team finishes off the pride.
I think they might be pulling the boss out.
Interesting.
I've actually heard of a thing where you can tricks the tank, and then you pull the boss out, and he will actually go outside of the arena, or not sure. He did pick up the orb. We'll see if he does that, because it is a possibility to pull out the boss, but because then the ads actually don't do anything anymore, and they grip him back down
he's
here.
Just getting the orb.
It looks like they really just did this for the orb, yeah.
Meanwhile, Golden Guardians have pulled this boss after clearing that massive trash pool we saw from them. Still have a little bit of that pride buff left as well, as they're going to be dealing with this first wave of ads. These ads need to be taken care of by either being killed or by being crowd controlled by the time the boss casts his final harvest. Otherwise, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. The ones that are crowd controlled, they're not going to cause too much problems. But if there's any that are out that are not crowd controlled, they're going to explode for a lot of damage on this plus 18 key level. There's not a lot of wiggle room for that happening. But you can see the two mages out there, one imprisoned and one shackled. They will be, just not exploding there because of the crowd control. So very well managed by Golden Guardians.
Yeah, so just quickly talking about those weapons, because we see the huge amounts of damage coming out from both of those teams, from the players who are picking up that orb. So we also see that huge pull happening now for Dusk Gargoyle stream, or at least they're done with the pull now, so they also have these huge numbers. And what basically is happening is there's just a bunch of weapons around this area that they can pick up, which help you out. And the specific item that they used was this orb that just does a huge amount of pulsing AoE damage around you. And that's the amount of damage that we saw from Yoda for Golden Guardians. That's what made this huge pull possible for them. So that's definitely something you need to keep an eye out, and that's something you also should be using on live servers if you haven't yet. Make sure you do use those orbs and also the spears as well, which help you out for bosses, but also for trash, as we see those both of the teams making sure they're using it for trash, because it is fortified, so it saves them a lot more time making sure they do those insanely big pulls.
Yeah, you can see Shakib actually carrying that spear on his back right now. It looks like they are not going to be just immediately going up to the... just Yoda is going to be going up to the Necropolis, so maybe they're going to be snapping mobs down in some manner. It's possible that Yoda tricks.
Amazing.
Yeah, so Tricks of the Trade is going to proc here as he runs around, and he's got to make sure he gets threat on everything here.
Ooh.
He is going to go down, but they should have threat on the rest of the group here, and here it comes. Yeah, so everything is going to get snapped onto Lighty here. It's going to be evading for a couple seconds. Mobs evade now, but now Yoda's going to go and grab that orb. Yeah, and he'll come back in, and they've got a lot of sigils here. Big spear damage coming out from Lip. Shakib also has a spear that's going to be used here, and Yoda is going to be using the orb, and using all of these weapons, plus the ability of snapping the mobs down out of the Necropolis. They are just going to be able to deal with the whole trash area very, very quickly. And they have the pride now on top of it that they can cleave down with this last stitch work. Incredible, incredible technique there from Golden Guardians.
That's actually an amazing pull. And he also, the death was also on purpose, right? Because he needs to get down somehow. And the only way to get down is to die and then release. So this was all intentional. They used that Tricks of the Trade to make sure once Yoda is dead, the mobs just snap down to Lighty. Just an incredible pull. They're up to 90% trash now, and they proc this Pride mob. And even the Pride mob, as you said, was efficient for them to kill, because they still had the Stitch work left, which just has more HP than the rest of the trash group. So they really efficiently deal with the Pride and that Stitch work, as well as they're now moving on, dealing with the rest of the trash that still is up there. And there's not that much left after that insane pull. Wow.
Yeah, that was a really good way to group up a bunch of mobs that don't normally group up. It did cost them some time, of course, having a death, having somebody go up by themselves, and then you still need to go up later. But it's working out well for them, as it looks like one combination of Fleshcrafter and Loyal Creation didn't get pulled there. If I had to guess, I would say this was probably a mistake. These two mobs were probably supposed to come with that pull. But it shouldn't be too costly, because I believe they've opened up such a commanding lead against here, as we can see, it does the Gargoyle stream, who are inside the Necropolis now and killing it the old-fashioned way rather than snapping anything down.
Yeah, it is possible. Do you think it might? Nah, I guess not. Sometimes they do want to keep this collector because he does cast a frontal cleaver that actually also does friendly damage to other mobs. So sometimes we see people just keeping up the collector to help you with the pride mobs, to help you with the boss, to help you with whatever. But it looks like that's not what they're planning on doing on Golden Guardian's side. So they definitely wasn't intended, as you mentioned. Now they have to deal with the 2 collectors, which is really just something that you can't speed up, because once this whole boss room is cleared, you get 2 collectors that spawn afterwards, and then you still have 2 extra trash packs right after that. That is all time gated, and you have to finish off that trash to move on. So definitely nothing they can do to speed this up other than killing the mobs faster. But yeah, this was just a huge play by Golden Guardians. With this snap, just huge amounts of time saved. They do have those 2 deaths compared to Gargoyle having 0 deaths, but those 10 seconds, they well made up with this insane pull.
Lighty taking a raging cleaver there instead of it hitting any of the squishy members of this group. Still almost killed him, though. That does a lot of damage. And yeah, it's tough because you can't leave mobs alive and bring them into the boss right from this room, because you need to kill them to spawn the next gauntlet part. So in the past, some teams have made use of like grabbing one of the collectors from the very start of the dungeon and snapping it into this area. That was back before you could briefly do that with bolstering, and you could bolster one up to be like 30 stories tall and then snap it in here and have it kill all the stuff. But now that doesn't work, it's no longer really worth doing all of that work to get a collector that can actually persist through this area, because you do have to kill the initial ones again to actually spawn these waves of the gauntlet here. And yeah, you can see they are making relatively quick work of this, but they're also making sure to save their cooldowns. Because they can't pull multiple packs together at a time like this, there's no way to accomplish that feasibly for them. They're instead just going to have to go do these one at a time, but they can use their cooldowns before and after on the big trash pull before, and then on the boss after.
Yeah, it is too bad that they fixed the issue with the collectors just one-shotting bosses with axes, because I would have loved to see some of those big cleavers being thrown at bosses. So unfortunate that that is not possible anymore. But we do see Golden Guardians now attacking that last trash pack, while we see Gargoyle. They are on their left trash pack, I believe, from the gauntlet. So not too far behind if you also look at the percentage, but yeah, still a decent difference in favor of Golden Guardians. It is a possibility that they can catch up on boss, but it's very unlikely, because I do assume that both of these teams are going to be one-facing the boss, so they're going to be killing it once the boss is hooked down before he jumps back up. And even if the boss jumps back up, they can just get him back down immediately with that third hook that the Stitchwork is casting on a boss. We do see the Pride as well spawning on Golden Guardian's side. They have 100% trash now, so they have to deal with this Pride. I do assume you could Shadow Melt this one. Do you think they don't want to Shadow Melt this to ensure that they can one-face the boss? Or
maybe.
Do you think they're just playing it safe?
Yeah, so the other option would be that they know how far ahead they are at this point, and they've decided they care more about safety than time, which is an adjustment you can make in the middle of a dungeon. I don't think Golden Guardians traditionally do those sorts of decisions, though. I think rather than adjusting their route, they usually will just keep the same plan that they've done in practice, which I assume this is that plan. Having a Pride for this, DPS check boss where you're trying to kill it before it goes back up, especially if you're going to cleave down the creation, which they probably are. It's probably impossible to avoid that creation dying with this comp. Then maybe they decide we just need to kill the boss before it does its first escape. And if that's the case, then yeah, having that Pride is definitely helpful. As a bit of a disaster strikes on the smaller part of our screen here, where Mode goes down does the Gargoyle stream. They were able to recover it eventually, but it does hurt them a little bit there and cost them, I believe, in the battle res department.
Yeah, so Mode did go down on this 2 collector pool, which really is a pack where no one ever uses their cooldowns and everyone always thinks it's the easiest pack. But then you have one person get fixated by 2 of those cleavers, and all of a sudden no one soaks it and the person dies. This is really a pack where I've seen so many deaths, and so many people always think it's like the easiest pack ever, but then you still just end up having a mistake here or there, or you're in the wrong position for the fixate, wrong position for the cleaver, and then you have a death. And that's exactly what happened here for Gargoyle, unfortunately. But we do do see Golden Guardians very well one-facing this boss. They already have it down on the second hook, right?
I was actually completely mistaken about that.
Phase?
Yeah, it escaped and they pulled it back down. So
okay. So
entirely,
they did need 2 phases. Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Which it's actually, if that's the pacing that boss has on these plus 18 keys with these comps, maybe that means that on Tyrannical, if we come back here in a future Cup weekend with Tyrannical potentially being active in here, I wonder just how difficult that boss might become because they did feel like they needed the pride for it, maybe just to survive even on Fortified here.
To be fair, we also they don't have the proper setup, I would say, either for huge amounts of single target bursts, right? We don't have any of those. Well, we do have the Fire Mage, right, with the combustion, but the other 2 classes maybe not the best to have this huge amount of single target burst. So maybe they could theoretically change up the setup to enable that kind of strat. But you don't want to switch out the Rogue, especially not with the strategy that they're playing, right?
Right. The thing you could do to make this group do more single target would be switching the Rogue into like an Unholy Death Knight or potentially a Boomkin or something, which you could do, but I think that the Rogue is really, really strong in this dungeon. We saw a lot of great use of vanishing, skipping ahead, grabbing a weapon. Tricks of the Trade was integral to the strategy here. So maybe you could have a Hunter do that. Hunter would also do more burst single target, but I think the Rogue has really shown that it's doing great here, even though, as I said earlier, it's competing for that 3rd place slot on the meters as Lighty actually overtakes Yoda here right now for 3rd place on the damage meters on Nalthor the Rhymebinder, the last boss in Necrotic Wake here, the only thing standing between Golden Guardians and a 1-0 lead in the series.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that replacing the Rogue would be a wise play for this dungeon specifically, just because of the huge amount of utility that it provides and also enables some of those pulls that would otherwise just not be possible at all. So yeah, definitely looks like the Rogue belongs into this dungeon if you want to play the strategy that we saw Golden Guardians pull out here. And the last boss, taking a decent amount of time, even on Fortified, this boss has quite a bit of HP. And then we also see the Exile coming out, where one of the damage dealers gets sent down to this other area, meaning you're just missing out on one whole damage dealer for quite a while. That's why this boss can tend to take a little while longer. And then it also might just be some RNG involved here as well, because if it sends down the damage dealer that just has the offensive cooldowns available at that moment, then you're just missing out even more than you would otherwise. But there we go, boss goes down, and Golden Guardians winning this first series 1-0. First game, sorry. Not serious. It's not over yet.
It's not over yet. Golden Guardians taking that first victory well in hand, and really, I'm most interested to see where Necrotic Wake sort of changes over time. And you both really nailed it in particular here, Dranos, of how many different things, weapons, buffs that can go on throughout this dungeon, and how much variety is possible in a lot of respects.
Yeah, I think a lot of what's going to go on in this dungeon as well is teams are going to have a bunch of great ideas, and they're going to have their first shot at what this dungeon is going to look like this weekend. And then they are going to combine their great ideas with all the great ideas they've seen from other teams, and then they will have a second draft of, all right, knowing now these other options that we've seen, how can we synthesize these? And teams are going to, again, come up with different answers for what the best things that any team had from this weekend were. And we'll get to keep seeing iteration until this dungeon just looks inhumanly fast, is my prediction.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that one. And titles, pretty similar comps that are going to be coming in for a lot of these teams, but I was really surprised to see just so many Kyrian from like everybody out of the Golden Guardians comp.
Yeah, I mean, the Kyrian, they're not going to have their steward up for every single one of the Goliaths. Plus, I think all of the AoE damage coming out of the Kyrians for the respective specs that were shown in this situation actually made a lot of sense. But you want to know something that will be constant, I'm pretty sure, through Necrotic Wake? It will always be Rogue because of Mark of the Master Assassin. Able to make sure that the weapons that you're able to pick up have 100% crit out of Vanish or out of Stealth is actually just so silly, and I forgot about it whenever we were talking about it pre-show, and as soon as they did the first pull, I just sat there and was like, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid, they have Master Assassin.
I was waiting to try to take a little screenshot because I could just see you put your hands over your face as you were just screaming. You were muted the whole time.
I realized. Yeah.
You were muted the whole time, and I'm like, what is he saying?
Yeah. Well, the replay off also plays a Rogue, so we were sitting there in the back just talking trash about Rogue, and then I was like, oh man.
And then it hit you.
Yeah.
Well, big congratulations, of course, to Golden Guardians coming into that one. And it was interesting to see that, a couple deaths coming into it, but As you know, Drautnus, you're kind of mentioning there's going to be a lot more refinement coming out for some of these strategies, but what do you think is going to happen with our next game coming up with Sanguine Depths? That's one we always kind of see as being very on the rails, but with MDI pulls and the slew of skips we've been able to see so far, how do you think that's going to change?
Yeah, I mean, the dungeon is inherently tends towards linear, right? Because it is just such a straight line in terms of where you're gonna walk there. But there's a lot of different options about what you can skip and what you can pull. So we might see teams come up with different answers about, like, do you want to skip entire trash segments, creative ways that you can potentially backtrack? Do you need Pride for bosses? That second boss in Sanguine Depths, one of the hardest bosses in the Shadowlands, but even on Fortified, I think it is one of the harder bosses. And whenever Tyrannical's active, that thing is extremely nasty. So setting up a Pride for it, I think on either of those affixes makes sense. And so how are you going to do that? Are you then going to back pull afterwards? Are you going to over pull beforehand? These are all different things that the teams are going to be considering here. And because they haven't seen each other's routes yet, I bet we'll have different answers about it.
Oh yeah, and there certainly were some different answers for Necrotic Wake in particular, Settles, as we take a look at it real quick. Bosses really were a priority in this one.
Oh my goodness, yeah, the bosses were the priority, but the biggest time saves, I feel like, came in the form of, like, some of these major trash pulls that were able to just be exterminated very rapidly. You see, the Blightbone, I think that this is one of the biggest differences between Golden Guardians and PI the Gargoyle, is, like, just this Blightbone pull at the very beginning. Whereas PI didn't elect to go and do that. They were a little bit slower at the beginning, but, like, just utilizing a bunch of your stuff. You even have that Pride spawning right on top of the boss. There's the activation of the Goliath mid-pull. And then, of course, you do have, like we were talking about, Yoda stealthed up, carrying that anima orb. He's getting ready. He's making sure that he's going to have his Mark of the Master Assassin, making sure he does not get broken out of stealth too early. But then he's able to come out of stealth, have a 100% crit chance on the orb, spiking over 150,000 DPS, like you can see on the screen right here. And, like, it just makes really quick work of the trash pull. You even have that Skeletal Monstrosity, which most people don't even pull that guy ever, but he was just in the way, so Lighty elected to end up just grabbing him as he was in his way. But you did have some really good stuff that you did also see out of PI. You saw Ramfam, like, running around the whole entire world, getting gripped back across the landing. You'll see that in a little bit. But they also are doing some Mark of the Master Assassin stuff. He's throwing the hammer straight out of stealth, and now he's dropping the orb too. I think the rogue's utility and the just the stuff that they do end up providing here is unmatched beyond any other class. Maybe they do end up bringing a hunter, but it would be like a supplementary hunter, not in, like, replacement of the rogue. And like Drautnus was saying, I feel like there's going to be a lot of technology that's going to be merged from groups and runs inside of this dungeon to a point where you end up getting an extremely, extremely quick run, because there's a lot of things that we saw from both teams that can be adopted and can be just added into other team strategies. And I do think the biggest thing is this snap right here. Like, I don't believe that there was a larger time loss for PI than Golden Guardians doing this strategy right here. I think I saw this strategy like 2 or 3 days ago for the first time, and now watching it take effect in the MDI, it saves you just so much time. Yoda goes and grabs that orb again, like, Mark of the Master Assassin, he's going to drop the orb. The whole entire trash pull is just going to then be deleted, even though he was AFK for a large portion of it. And, like, this is how you save the most amount of time. They literally merged 4 packs into one and were able to quickly deal with it, while you have PI the Gargoyle sitting here doing the pulls 1 pack at a time or 2 packs at a time. So, yeah, I mean, I felt like this was an incredibly high-octane run that I think that we learned a lot from, and there are a lot of things that you can take into your own runs with this kind of stuff as well.
That's right. Just bring Rogue, basically.
I mean, it's not just the Rogue, but it's also about, like, how you use your weapons and, like, when you're using them and whatnot. I mean, yeah, the Rogue is obviously facilitating some of this stuff, but I feel like a lot of groups just elect to go with the safe approach of weaponing bosses whenever you really can. You use them just on trash pulls and kill them instantly.
Yeah, and I was particularly impressed, especially when you were mentioning the very first pull coming up for Necrotic Wake that Golden Guardians was using. You know, Yoda wasn't even part of that pull from the beginning. He just instantly just runs over, activates the Goliath, and then when Prideful spawns, the healer doesn't really have to stress all that much at all, because everybody's packed in together. The Animus Exhaust from the Goliath not only deals a bunch of damage, but it also heals everybody nearby. So being able to, I've been very interested to see how well they've been able to support the healer in a lot of these aspects of just, well, we have a ton of 3-minute cooldowns. We're able to stack on top of each other, blast everything. But the follow-up, in case pulls start going longer, they're able to just so heavily lean on some of these bonuses that was actually insane to see. So Sanguine Depths coming up on the next dungeon and everything like that. And again, these bosses in particular, Nagura, are extremely, extremely deadly.
Yeah, Sanguine Depths, one of my least favorite dungeons because of the bosses that are so incredibly difficult. I just always have a really hard time in that key specifically, especially on higher levels when you have the first boss who is hard already with that smash and the orbs coming out. The fixate that also needs to be soaked at the same time. It can cause huge amounts of problems for your group. And then you also have that second boss, also huge amounts of damage coming out onto your group with that ad that just does pulsing AoE damage. And then you also have that extra cast from the boss that also does AoE damage if you don't move out with it specifically. So we'll see how those two teams handle it. We do have fortified, so the bosses thankfully are not harder than they already are. And we also have inspiring and quaking. And inspiring might actually be decently difficult in this key specifically, just because a lot of those mobs have some really dangerous casts in Sanguine Depths, which need to be interrupted, otherwise you might have some trouble. And it's also like very small corridors, which can cause some issues as well with the Inspired. Maybe you're not able to get it out, or you're not able to go past it. So we'll see how they deal with this one.
That's right. Right now, Golden Guardians is up 1 versus does Gargoyle stream as we're getting ready to enter into game number 2 here in the Sanguine Depths.
All right, looks like we start the key soon as Golden Guardians and Das Gargoyle stream have the second game. So this is the last chance for Gargoyles to catch up to the Golden Guardians if they want to get into that third match of the series. This is a dungeon we haven't seen yet today, and we also haven't seen this in time trials. So definitely gonna see some different strategies coming out from this team, from both of the teams. Sanguine Depths is not a key where everything is open. As I said, you have these small corridors, and there's some trash that you have to play, specifically at the end during this gauntlet. But there's also a bunch of trash that you can skip. So we'll see how they handle it, the teams, which trash mobs they decide to skip, which trash mobs they decide to do. And we'll also see if they decide to skip any sort of pride mobs with that Shadow Mount, which we've seen in halls specifically earlier. But to be fair, they actually played a lot more pride mobs than I thought they would. I don't know about you, Dreadnoughts, but I thought they actually gonna skip quite a few pride mobs, and it looked like they're playing quite a lot.
Yeah, I think it's about 50-50, maybe even 60-40 in favor of the prides being killed rather than being skipped, which is certainly, Night Elf's still strong for skipping the few that you do choose to skip, but turns out there's a lot of pulls where it's either difficult to skip the pride effectively, or it's just really valuable to have pride to make a bigger pull or a boss fight safer or faster with multiplying it with your cooldowns. And so, yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of different options for each of these pride mobs, and teams having to make a difficult decision there, which I think is really cool. Looks like one of our keystones may have failed to correctly start, so we're just sorting that out here before we get underway here with Game 2 between Golden Guardians and Does Gargoyle stream. Of course, last game of the day for either of these teams. They will have 2 more matches after this one. So if this game is decisive, the Gargoyles will be heading down to the lower bracket, but that is still an option to win the tournament as well, because this is double elimination. No lower bracket matches today, but we will have some tomorrow and on Sunday. So not out of it yet, even if they lose here, but they really, really rather stay in that upper bracket if they can. That would require them winning not just here, but in Game 3, which is Mist of Tirna Scithe, which is also a tricky place. Mist of Tirna Scithe is the kind of dungeon that it's a very popular one on the live servers. It's not one I'd be excited about going up against Golden Guardians in. I think you'd have better chances here in Sanguine Depths, where there's a lot more that could feasibly go wrong for your opponents.
That's true as well. And, if whichever of these teams does move on into the upper bracket, they also have to face off against Echo tomorrow. So it's really quite a challenging side of the bracket that we're seeing very early on for these teams. But I think in a lot of cases, Nagura, this is pretty much par for the course in many respects for Golden Guardians. So used to fighting, almost their nemesis, really. Their top rivals echo so early in the upper bracket so quickly.
Yeah, it really seems to, at least in the past, it just seemed to be this same story every time where they meet up in the upper bracket, they lose against them, fall down into the lower bracket, and then fight them again in the finals. And the lower bracket, it's just always so much favorable to be in the upper bracket because you have less games that you need to play. You can practice more for the final games, which has more games since it is a best of 5. So just so much more favorable to be in the upper bracket and so much better for practice time. But Golden Guardians, of course, have to win against Gargoyles first to be able to meet Echo in the upper bracket tomorrow. So they do have to win this Sanguine Depths key. And Sanguine Depths, as Dratno said, is really just a dungeon that is just incredibly difficult. I know on live servers, a lot of teams struggle with this dungeon specifically, even though the timer of this dungeon is not that hard. As long as you don't wipe, the timer is pretty easy, right? But just so many problems in this dungeon with the boss's difficulty, the trash difficulty. It's just so easy to make a mistake here.
Oh, those grand overseers, the gauntlet at the end. There's the tight corridors. Whenever you have to fight any of those chamber sentinels, there's a lot of space that gets eaten up almost immediately. So problems abound for a lot of these teams, and that's probably one of the more interesting things, looking at how some of these routes are going to a bit better develop as well, Dratnos, over time, is to see what are they going to be able to actually get around for some of these worst positions.
Yeah, I think things like, what order you're going to do the dungeon in, it can be pretty easy within a team to pretty quickly identify what you think is going to be best. You'll try a lot of different things in your first few practice runs, but maybe there's a pull that just doesn't feel like it's going to work out. And then the first cup comes around and you see that another team has got it working. And you're like, okay, hang on. Maybe we need to go back to the drawing board here and shave 30 seconds off of our Sanguine Depths by adapting this strategy. So that's one of the exciting parts about the MDI is there's sort of a collaborative element here where by the end, even though these teams are competing against each other, it's also sort of that competition forges the best possible route by the end of the season. And that is a fun process to see as these teams, learn from each other and keep pushing each other to do even faster runs of these dungeons.
Yeah, it's sort of a crowdsourced competition for the best possible routes. And, every season we're always kind of surprised by greater growth on the routes. Every new seasonal affix starts changing some of these different encounters around just a little bit. But we're ready to go. Let's see what both these teams have in store as Golden Guardians and does Gargoyle Stream face off in the Sanguine Depths.
Looks like it's going to be the Venthyr Vengeance Demon Hunter from Does Gargoyle Stream. Door of Shadows in with that Soulbind trait that makes Door of Shadows disorient, followed by the Misery Sigil, and they're going to group up a bunch of mobs here onto this Venthyr Lantern. So will Golden Guardians, who are doing this pull slightly differently, using that Ring of Frost instead. This Venthyr Gargoyle, or Lantern thing that you can see right on top of where Lighty is on the left, once that's activated, it will start sucking up the souls of anything you kill near it and giving you a stacking 5% damage and healing buff. So if you can get 10 mobs killed there, that's 50% damage and healing for the next minute. Wow, Gargoyle actually making very short work of that pull. Slightly smaller pull than what the Golden Guardians did, though, with the mob up here not included for Gargoyle and already killed for Golden Guardians.
Yeah, and we also see interesting comps coming out here with the Hunter for Gargoyle, which is the first time we see that Hunter coming out as well. Hunter, really popular on live servers, but not as popular so far in those keys. And we also saw a Moonkin for Golden Guardians, which is also a popular class on live servers, but the first time we see it here in the MDI. So we'll see how those two classes can do in this Sanguine Depths key, as we see another big pull come in by Golden Guardians as they gather up some of these ticks and some of these bigger mobs here. One thing to note about this smash, so the blue swirly on the ground, this is something that a lot of people don't necessarily know. It doesn't actually do impact damage. You can see the swirly on the ground where it jumps to. The Umbral Crash, as we can see right here. But the impact point, the swirly doesn't actually do extra damage, so you can just stand in it, and that's what we see those teams doing. They just all gather up within this disc bubble here of J.B, and they just don't move out of it because you don't have to, and therefore the brute also doesn't go away from the group, so everything just stays stacked up, and it's just better for the cleave damage.
J.B pioneering the third of 4 covenants now that exist in the game. The third one we've seen for the Disciplined Priest, though, he will be playing that Venthyr, getting access to the Venthyr lanterns for the Golden Guardians, rather. Whereas Gargoyle instead are going to be getting access to the Venthyr from their tank instead, the Venged Demon Hunter. So different ways to get to the same answer, which is making sure you have access to that covenant-specific dungeon buff, and really goes to show just the versatility of the Priest, actually, in terms of just how many covenants they can feasibly play if you need it for the dungeon-specific buffs. This is our second series, and we've already seen 3 different covenants out of that spec.
Yeah, very interesting. We also see the Moonkin playing Kyrian, which is uncommon. We do see most Moonkins on live servers at least playing that Night Fae for the Convoke ability, but for AoE, Kyrian is better. So we see the Kyrian bond coming out, where the Moonkin basically bonds himself to another player, activating that bond every 1 minute, making sure the damage is increased, and you're basically sharing, or you're giving each other damage or portions of your damage for a little while. So that's why we'll probably see the Moonkin and the Mage probably sharing that damage a little once in a while once this bond is getting activated by Yoda. So now we see them pull the boss Crixus, and looks like they're not doing any sort of shenanigans here. They're not pulling any trash on top or anything like that, because this boss is very dangerous, as we've been talking about earlier, even unfortified.
Yeah, they have a tremendous amount of respect here for Crixus. I remember back during beta, we had a Keystone Masters tournament where this boss was just wiping its team over and over again for like 40 minutes. And that is something that this boss certainly has the potential to do. A lot of runs of this dungeon end here because of just how difficult this one is. They do have access, however, to Shadow Melds, which I think you can meld if you're targeted by the charge, which is something they can maybe do if they feel like they need to save a little bit of damage from that mechanic.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a reason on why exactly they're running the Druid here, and I can't really think of it, because funnily enough, Krona on Das Gargoyle stream is a Moonkin main on live servers and does not play the Moonkin. He does play the Mage in their comp, so I really wonder what kind of strat they have in mind playing that Moonkin, but I guess we'll see it later. Maybe there's a specific pull they need the Druid utility for, because Druids do have quite a bit of utility that can be used in those dungeons, so we'll have to keep an eye on that, and maybe also something specific that they use the Hunter for on Gargoyle side. So we'll see. Once they finish off this boss, we can see them just kiting out those orbs from the smash, because the boss was really low, so they just decided to kite the boss away from the orbs instead of soaking them, so they don't have to deal with this AoE damage in a group.
Slight lead being taken here by Does Gargoyle stream. They're about 10 seconds ahead of where Golden Guardians are, with the exact same trash count and boss kill timing. So actually a perfect time to compare these two teams. However, with different comps, they may have slightly different pulls in their future. As you can already see, slightly different stuff getting pulled here, as Golden Guardians in our smaller camera now have done a much bigger pull with the Gargoyle included, whereas Gargoyle are saving that for later. Love that team name there. Here's a
yeah. It looked like they also CC'd one of the inspired mobs there, so they didn't have to deal with that aura, making sure they still can interrupt the mobs or can CC them. Otherwise, with that inspired mobs, of course, you're unable to CC or interrupt or anything like that. And because of the oppressor in this group specifically, there's a bunch of very important casts that actually need to be interrupted. Therefore, we did see the CC come in. And now we saw Lydie break the CC in the oppressor on that inspired one. And now they're making sure they're finishing that one off with the Sentinel as well, so they actually can interrupt all of this. So this is, I would say, a pretty slow pull for them, but they probably just decided they have to do this because this inspired is just too dangerous for them to deal with on top of the rest of the mobs.
Yeah, I mean, they've still sped up relative to Gargoyle, who ended up doing this in 2 pulls. Because Golden Guardians have access to that Moonkin, they were able to Force of Nature, and that locked the frontal bleed cast from the Sentinel in a nice direction that wasn't going to hit their tank or any of their other players on one of those treants. So as long as they were looking out for that, they were able to actually have Lydie survive that pull, whereas Gargoyle didn't have access to the Force of Nature, those treants taunting that pull. And I think that Force of Nature actually was a large part of what made pulling the Sentinel with the rest of that AoE feasible.
Yeah, that's very possible. Force of Nature definitely helping out for those big amounts of pulls. Now, Inspiring actually makes the mobs immune to be taunted by Force of Nature, so that's
why they had to
also
pull
a
that
very
in
big
late.
reason probably,
Yeah.
why they didn't pull it in immediately. And now we see a double Overseer pull actually being pulled off by Golden Guardians, which seems to be very dangerous, especially because they have so many stacks. Look at the debuffs here in the group frame. Not only does it decrease your damage, which just elongates this pull, but you also have those dread bindings coming out as well, which needs to be either line of sighted or outranged. Otherwise, it does a huge amount of damage, but they did now manage to finish it off. And yeah, just good job by Golden Guardians dealing with all of this trash. And the roar coming out as well, stampeding roar by the druid to make sure they're speeding up the next pull a little bit. And now they're standing still, so it didn't do anything.
Yeah, so there's another Venthyr Lantern up here where you can see Gargoyle now on our big screen, and Golden Guardians both are going to be making use of this Venthyr Lantern with a huge pull of small trash mobs from the little room off to the left, plus some of these bigger mobs from down the corridor. And this Venthyr Lantern is very good to use in this area, and we'll see both teams getting a large amount of benefit out of that. Although Gargoyle actually, they have a tougher time even clicking that Lantern because their Venthyr is their tank, and their tank can't really go and click that in the middle of this pull without being sent to the floor, where he would actually join JB, who's died on the side of Golden Guardians. That's going to be a battle res. Luckily, they have Yoda on the Boomkin with the instant cast battle res, something that Gargoyle doesn't have. So another difference in comps there is going to allow them to recover that death nice and quick and avoid it turning into anything more of a disaster. Just going to cost them that one battle res, not the end of the world by any stretch.
Yeah, so one thing that I wanted to mention that already happened to me as well is these Sentinels, they cast a quaking effect underneath their character, and after a couple of seconds it goes up, knocks you into the air, and does a huge amount of damage if you stand in it. So you need to dodge it, but sometimes when you get quaking at the same time, your quaking animation is basically covering the floor animation, and you don't even realize it's underneath you if it lines up exactly at the same time. So that's definitely something they have to be careful about to make sure they know this is actually the Sentinel cast and not their quaking effect, so don't get hit by that one. As we see Golden Guardians dealing with that Mist Dancer pool. The Mist Dancers can be quite tricky because they leave behind those mirror images of themselves, and whenever they cast that frontal, the mirror image will also repeat the frontal as well. So you want to make sure you position the mirror images in a line, as we can see them do here on Gargoyle's side, so it's still dodgeable. Otherwise, if they're all over the place, then it's incredibly hard to dodge the frontal from the mirror images.
Yeah, especially with two of them in the middle of the pull. As we can see here for Gargoyle, there's just a lot of nonsense going on their space here. And they have such narrow space to work with. Because of the way Sanguine Depths works, there's just these narrow corridors all throughout the place. And it's so difficult to manage all these different mechanics if you are pulling multiple packs at the same time, given just how little space you have to play with. So great work actually by both teams so far in making these bigger pulls work in a dungeon where normally they are extremely punishing.
Yeah, definitely well done by both of these teams, and how close the teams really are. I mean, look at the percentage. We do see Gargoyles having that third Pride mob now spawned with the 60% trash that they're at right now, while Golden Guardians still have to deal with this mini boss. This is something that we do see skipped a lot, just because he does cast his frontal, which is really annoying, and then there's just a bunch of neutrals that don't give any percentage, and it just seems kind of inefficient. But it looks like Golden Guardians seemed to want to pull that one for the Pride proc, and now it looks like they're skipping the Pride. So they proc the 60% one, are blinking away with their Night Fae abilities, and now Shadow Melting off the aggro from that one. So not playing the 60% Pride, while Gargoyle chose to play it.
Yeah, that is definitely a difference between these two teams here, and it keeps that gap really close. You can see these two teams operating at very similar percentages. Gargoyle a little bit ahead, though, both in terms of count, and they actually still have that Pride buff rolling, which is another advantage for them relative to Golden Guardians. So I would actually say Gargoyle now look like they may be, 30 seconds or so in the lead here, but with Golden Guardians setting up some world markers, running around here, it looks like maybe they are setting up a massive pull to try and reclaim the advantage here.
Yeah, definitely looks like they're pulling something
Oh my
incredibly big. And we
Mighty.
also see the inspired mobs here. This is really dangerous because you have the inspired, meaning none of these ads are actually
the boss as
seeable,
well,
so they have to be
right?
incredibly careful. They're, yeah, they actually did pull the boss on top here as well, which is, we see 2 people go down, JB going down as well. Yoda is trying to get JB back up, but this is just a full team wipe coming in for Golden Guardians. What a disaster. There must have been something going wrong. I doubt they wanted to pull the boss on top of this. Or maybe they just wanted to, maybe they wanted to CC the inspired and pull the trash with the boss, but not inspired plus boss plus all the trash. It seems like a really dangerous thing to do.
I don't know. There's a lot of pulls, these MDI style pulls, that when they work, they look great. And then like sometimes just like one kick misses, one person gets like meleeed in the back or whatever, or just, you know, it just doesn't quite work out one time and it looks like it was a completely impossible pull. That's one of the amazing things about this this format, about these teams, is the ability they have to make those pulls work sometimes. What you don't usually see is the thousands of times it didn't work in practice, and we did get to see one of those times here, where that absolutely is basically what happened to Golden Guardians, is a massive pull that had a lot of setup, ended up just kind of completely falling apart because there were so many mobs, there's so much going on. But we may still see them attempt it once again. My guess is they'll probably decide to slow down at this point and do this pull a little bit more safely a second time, as they do have Yoda stealthing back and trying to res to save this dungeon for them.
Yeah, unfortunately, they did use all of their offensive cooldowns, so probably not going to be able to replicate the same pull again. And yeah, we'll see what actually went wrong there. Maybe it was the inspired that they didn't manage to get the CC off, that they accidentally got into the pack, making Force of Nature not work. Anything that could have went wrong here, really, as Dratnos mentioned, just anyone getting hit in the back, any cast going through, that just causes an instantaneous wipe for Golden Guardians, unfortunately. Now, they're probably going to go slower, but we see Gargoyle, on the other hand, they are now proccing that 80% Pride, so the second to last Pride that they have to deal with. Doesn't look like they want to skip it, so definitely dealing with it, which is wise, because they need to deal with the third boss, and the third boss is really dangerous, as we mentioned a million times already, even though it is fortified, so that's why they probably deal with this Pride mob, making sure they have the extra damage to make the boss fight easier.
The second boss, right? The Executor Tarvold guy up here in the ring? That
second boss, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely one of the most brutal bosses in the whole expansion. So having a Pride for it, again, even unfortified, it makes so much sense. Covenant check, though, real quick here. One thing I've noticed on the side of Gargoyle is their Hunter is actually playing Kyrian rather than Fae. So access to that resonating arrow rather than the wild spirits that we see out of most hunters on the live servers. That is, I think, I'm not actually 100% sure what's going on to lead to that decision. I know actually on the side of Golden Guardians, Yoda was playing Hunter for Raid and played Kyrian for a lot of progression. So it's certainly a competitive choice there. We see a lot of it in PvP as well because it allows you to ignore line of sight. But I'm surprised a little bit to see it here in PvE.
Yeah, definitely interesting choice by Gargoyles on their side, but seems to be working out for them so far as they're fighting this second boss now. With that Pride buff, they do have a lot of cooldowns available. They used all of their offensives here at the start. We will also see Krona having the combustion ready again. The most important thing for this boss is that you just manage to finish off this ad that spawns once in a while immediately, because whenever this ad is up, it just does a pulsing AoE damage on the whole group. And on top of that, you also have this extra boss ability where one member gets targeted and just gets basically huge single target pulsing damage on that person. So just double the amount of damage that you need to heal as a healer if that ad is still alive. So definitely want to make sure you deal with that. And then whenever the ad dies, we see that huge pool dropping on the ground as well. That's why you just need to kite the boss backwards. And at the same time, you also need to dodge the beams that are coming in either on the outer side or on the inner side. So want to make sure you dodge them either way.
Golden Guardians here now, they are really playing to steal this from Gargoyle. If something goes comparably wrong for Gargoyle as it did for Golden Guardians, they are going to get their lust on and start attacking Tarvold. But Tarvold already almost dead for Gargoyle, who also have an extra 13% count, including a Pride, under their belts relative to Golden Guardians. So it is really Gargoyles to lose from here. If they can just execute their route with a high degree of cleanliness from here, it should be their game. There's not too much left. in this dungeon. There's not really too many options left as well. With 84% count, they are going to be skipping the small trash after the third boss, but then they've got the whole gauntlet to get through and the last boss as well, and that is still a lot of potential problems for them.
Yeah, definitely still a lot of issues that this last gauntlet specifically can cause, because during that gauntlet you just have those bears spawn throughout the whole time until the boss is basically moving away. And during that time, if anything goes wrong, it's really hard to recover because you don't necessarily get out of combat immediately, so you can't get rests back up, you can't, the healer can't drink necessarily, so it can definitely cause some issues. So we'll see how the Gargoyles deal with that one, as they're now fighting that third boss. This third boss is being dealt with a lot of trash as well. It looks like they're pulled the oppressors on top of the boss, which can be incredibly dangerous because this boss also does a huge amount of AoE damage. We saw them picking up those orbs for the AoE cast of the boss. The more orbs you have picked up, the less damage it does to you. So you definitely want to make sure that everyone gets enough orbs, or you use a huge defensive to give the orbs to the rest of your team. And then we also see the swirlies coming at you, just need to be dodged. That also does some ticking damage on a group as well. One of the oppressors has been CC'd, so they didn't want to deal with all of them, and they probably also didn't need it for the trash percentage, so they might shadow melt off the aggro afterwards, or they just pull it into the boss later on. We will see how they want to deal with this last trash mob here in this room.
Yeah, that was the inspiring one. So they didn't want to allow it to come in with the other oppressors because they wanted to be able to maintain their interrupts. And you can see a similar strategy being deployed by Golden Guardians on the other side here. Golden Guardians are close in terms of they're pulling the same boss now as Gargoyle, which is an improvement, but they are still substantially behind in trash. They are going to need to do a trash pull after this boss, whereas Gargoyle is going to be free to skip straight to that final gauntlet. So Gargoyle here, certainly more than just like DPS differences separate these teams. Something would have to go actually wrong for Gargoyle for this one to close back up.
Yeah, definitely. And then you also have the 30 seconds timer that got added to Golden Guardians because of those 6 deaths as well. So also something to consider. As Gargoyles are now about to finish off the boss, looks like they don't deal with this oppressor at all, so they're probably just going to shadow melt that one off later on once they decide to de-aggro it. And now we see how they deal with this trash. This trash can be decently dangerous. There's 2 trash groups, and some of them involve mist dancers, and you also have the sentinels, but it looks like they're just using their invis potion here, so they're just skipping past this trash completely. As you mentioned before, they don't need this trash since they're already up to 89%, don't have to deal with it at all. But unfortunately, the hunter went down, and this is really bad because they're in combat now.
No, as long as they don't step onto that bridge.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thankfully, no one stepped into the bridge. No one triggered the event, so Mode can cast that Mass Resurrection. Good for them, otherwise this would have been really difficult for them to get the hunter back without being out of combat, so well done for them.
Yeah, now this is going to be a really interesting gauntlet for Gargoyle because they have that Venthyr player who can activate the Gargoyle in the second part here. They've killed off all the trash in the first part, and they're going to start moving Call. Once it gets below 90%, it will move automatically to the second set of trash, and that one features one of those Venthyr lanterns that we were talking about at the very start of this dungeon. But in order to activate that, you have to channel a cast for a bit. It's not as easy as it is for Golden Guardians, who have JB, who can just do that because healers can do whatever. You know, they always get relegated to doing that kind of grunt work. But for Gargoyle, it's their tank who's the Venthyr, and giving up on those defensive globals, giving up on ways to survive while getting meleeed is a really, really sketchy proposition. Let's see if they decide to try and make that work.
Yeah, let's see how they deal with this next. It looks like they're just finishing off some of the Gargans here beforehand, before they engage this next fight.
So I think they can drop combat here.
Also...
Okay, it looks like that's not the issue, though. There it is.
Maybe
so it's going to be this...
Really...
Yeah, Sigil of Misery to activate this is going to be how they make it work. So great maneuvering there around it. Sorry, you were saying?
Now, I just wanted to mention that they might know that they're ahead at this point. I mean, Das Gargoyle stream is that new MDI team. They haven't actually participated before in comparison to Golden Guardians, who have been around forever. So they are allowed to watch the stream while competing. So it's very possible that they know that they're ahead and that they can play safe and, finish up the Gargans, get out of combat, make sure we get some mana back. But since it is the first time they're competing, they might not have the mentality to say, yeah, let's calm down and just do something, get out of combat or whatever. So that's something they have to consider as well. But looks like they're doing a really good job here as they finished off this pack and they got the Venthyr. What's the name?
The lantern buff. The
lantern,
5%,
the lantern buff. There we go.
Yeah, so 5% stacking damage and healing across the whole team. They've got a full 10 stack that they are bringing into this. So 50% increased damage and healing for the last part of this gauntlet. Extremely helpful, as this is a pretty scary part of the dungeon. There's a lot that can go wrong here, and you're pretty low on cooldowns after having gone through the whole earlier parts of this gauntlet without dropping combat. They could have dropped combat there if they had wanted to by killing the Gargans earlier, but they decided against it. They decided to just keep going once they had figured out how to set up their Sigil of Misery setup for that Lantern, and that is going to be the gauntlet completed for them, and they are at 96% count. A trap coming out here, and I think what they are going to do is skip this set of trash, and then they will be pulling the last room maybe to get the last bit of count that they need here. A little bit of threat being generated here. They'll probably wait for this Quake, and then they're going to leap forward. Life Grip combined with that as well to help create even more distance before the Shadow Meld comes out. And now this is going to be a massive trash pull. Bunch of Gargans here. Unlike in Halls of Atonement, Gargans are not scary in Sanguine Depths. In Sanguine Depths, actually, Gargans are among the least scary mobs. They don't do that nasty bleed that the Halls of Atonement ones do. And so you can see they're able to make short work of those mobs. Killing off this last Houndmaster will spawn the final pride of the dungeon for Gargoyle, while Golden Guardians are still working on their gauntlet. Gargoyle are going to kill this because they've already melded. They can't meld it even if they wanted to. And then they will take that massive damage buff into the final boss fight, whereas the Golden Guardians still have yet to even spawn this pride.
Yeah, and they have everything available to them as well. They have the 3 Battle Aresses in case something does go wrong. They have the Bloodlust as well to get this extra damage on the boss. But this last boss is probably the easiest boss in this whole dungeon. It's really not as dangerous as any of these other bosses at all. So it should really not be a problem for Dusk Gargoyle stream to finish this off. But this Pride mob is causing some issues, as mode is completely unfortunately. But now the Pride buff is going to regen that mana for the healer. So no problem as they're now engaging General Call.
Yeah, General Call starts at 70% because you've taken down 30% of her health from the gauntlet, and you only need to get her to 50% health before the dungeon is over here. So they're actually almost halfway through this fight already with just massive damage coming out. The combination of Bloodlust, all their cooldowns, and the Prideful buff are just making very short work of this boss. And yeah, 50%, the dungeon ends, and that is all they need to do here. 8% left on the boss's health. Mechanics are coming out. They are fairly easy to deal with, though, as you mentioned, compared to several of the other bosses. Gloom's Wall, important to stack up in that barrier used by the active ability of whoever is carrying the Naru there. And yeah, just 5% left on this boss's HP, and Gargoyle will even up this series 1-1 against Golden Guardians. A very impressive result for this team of relative inexperience compared to Golden Guardians, who are a very storied MDI team.
Yeah, definitely incredibly well done by Dusk Gargoyle stream. Once they finish up this boss, we're going to go to the 3rd game, right? And it's going to be a Mists dungeon, which is also a dungeon we haven't seen yet. JB going down for Golden Guardians here, just having some issues with that gauntlet, but at this point it's too late for them anyway, as Dusk Gargoyle stream getting that last AoE that they have to use the shield for, and now they're done. It is going to be 1-1 as Dusk Gargoyle stream wins Sanguine Depths.
Indeed they do, and at the very beginning of this game, Dranos, you absolutely called it, talking about how this map would actually be pretty advantageous to Dusk Gargoyle stream to be able to kind of blunt the lead that Golden Guardians was trying to be able to win and trying to be able to develop, and they just ran away with it after that one. They take that series, or they take that game, and the series is now up to 1-1. It's gonna be pretty good.
Yeah, it's that's what you're looking for. That's the exact kind of thing you want to do, is win games. You do that a couple times, you can win a tournament. You do that several times in a row,
that easy,
you win the season. So
thanks, Stratnos.
Good strategy coming out from Gargoyle on that one. But yeah, I mean, that was Sanguine Depths, right? A volatile dungeon where things went well for Gargoyle. They played very well, but also things went poorly for Golden Guardians. A lot less likely for things to go poorly for either team in Mists of Tirna Scithe. That is a dungeon that, by contrast, is much more... it's one that is pretty easy to get down pretty reliably. It means that the pools are bigger and scarier, and you keep adding to the pools until they get to that scary point, because of course, why not? That's how MDI works. But Golden Guardians is a team that I wouldn't count on messing that kind of thing up. I think that this is a dungeon where you're going to need to beat a good time from the opponents rather than just, Gargoyle had a time that was going to be competitive in Sanguine Depths, but Golden Guardians really was not going to have a good run there. So definitely an entirely different experience here if Gargoyle wants to stay in this upper bracket.
Oh, most definitely. And let's start going over some of this dungeon as well here, Tettles, because like Dranos was just saying, it's incredibly volatile.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is incredibly volatile, but I feel like this dungeon was ran kind of similar to what you could potentially see during like one of your own personal key sessions. Like, obviously, there's some stuff, like pulling this trash pack into Crixus is dangerous, but they did also have pride for it. So while on the surface it does kind of seem dangerous, they're able to burn it before it does end up doing anything scary. This pull, I still don't know how good this double Overseer pull is, because it stacks up that decreased damage dealt buff so quickly. You see them sitting at 10 stacks of that damage dealt decrease buff for such a long time. Lighty gets incredibly low. They were able to pull it off. So I think that pack is relatively good more often than not. But it does kind of make me wonder like how good that pull really is. Then something that Gargoyle did that confused me was they ended up bloodlusting this seemingly random trash pack. I can only believe that it was due to the fact that they were only going to get one more less in the dungeon period, so they may as well use it here. It's the only thing that would even make sense. So it looks like we had like a neck-and-neck match. This goes until the Golden Guardians are pulling a lot of their trash. Like, this area in the dungeon is incredibly scary, and then they pulled Tarvald on top of it, which I couldn't tell if it was intentional or accidental. From what it looks like in the replay, it almost seems to be accidental. But it's hard to tell while just looking at a replay. They do end up wiping to that. They end up having to like slowly run back. They had to res. They had to re-pull a bunch of the trash packs. And at that point, Gargoyle is like so readily in the lead. They make a couple of really good moves for themselves. They pull a lot of the trash in the third boss room into the third boss, which I would say is pretty dangerous. They do an interesting strategy where they end up invis potioning past that bridge pack going into the call area. That's actually really dangerous, because whenever you're fighting the trash gauntlet with call, you're able to like release if you die, but not if you invis potion past this pack. You're like you'll be stuck in combat. You won't be able to get back to your group. So it's really dangerous, but it is time efficient because these packs are time consuming and aren't efficient at all. And then of course, does Gargoyle stream does end up doing some really sizable pulls in the call boss encounter gauntlet area, on top of this lantern, getting a 10 stack of the damage increase buff, doing a really good job. Mode did start to get tapped on mana towards the very end, but that's just one of those Disc Priest things on call. This Trash Gauntlet and Disc Priest's mana, I've seen many of Disc Priests go here. Jack, do you know how to really prevent that in a reliable way?
Well, part of the big thing when you're going through that gauntlet is looking at like how best you can sort of start pacing your mana. One of the biggest things is like Mind Blast is like extremely expensive, and you start noticing how Mode was trying to avoid casting that as much. You also saw a lot of times where he starts leaning on a lot of his cooldowns. For example, the one that was just shown through the Sigil of Misery, pulling the double packs together. He had his Boon of the Ascended from the Kyrian Covenant, and he's just leaning on that to be able to do all the muscle work and all the healing. So one of the big things that I like watching about Mode is he does a really good job of using a lot of his cooldowns, using all the resources at his disposal and everything, specifically for moments where he doesn't have Prideful. And then once he has that Prideful buff, he has no problem spamming as much Shadow Mend as he can, using whatever less mana efficient abilities at his disposal. And he's able to get enough mana to be able to keep everybody alive through that last Prideful and then walking a call. But I can't tell you how many times I've had just enough mana or not enough mana to be able to deal with that Prideful. So it's been very impressive to watch, the whole breadth of all these priests trying to get through these 18 dungeons and being put in a lot of awkward spots as well. So Game 3 going to be coming up to be the more decider on this one. And Dranos, you were saying before that this is the position that was a bit more favorable to Golden Guardians. Was that right?
Yeah, I think that this is a dungeon where it's kind of one of the more reminiscent of, say, Legion MDIs, which Golden Guardians has a lot of players with experience from, even BFA MDIs, where a lot of dungeons were like particularly like Mauve Souls in Legion, right? 3 big pulls, the whole dungeon, right? Midst Tirna Scithe, we have this maze segment in the middle of the dungeon, which both teams are going to have the same maze for, but they don't know what it is yet, so they're going to have to play it against each other. But it's going to be completely balanced between the two, so there will be no timer impact on what maze they get. Other than the maze section, though, I expect the first part of the dungeon is going to be massive, massive pull, and the last part of the dungeon is going to be a massive, massive pull. And I think that is the kind of environment that Golden Guardians, an MDI veteran team, is really going to shine in, compared to Gargoyle, who's a team that worked really nicely in Sanguine Depths, which was pretty similar to live key pulls, which is where most of their players have most of their experience.
I struggle to know how large they're going to go because you have those Tyranian villagers there, and those with their overgrowth cast is so costly time-wise because it will lock up and stun players. That is really, really scary. So I do wonder how much they are going to pull. You can feign death and you can meld it off whenever it's targeting you, but you may end up needing it for like the Pride or something like that. There may be a larger time save. Also, the Tyranian villagers do not give a trash count currently on the TR, which it's fine. The competitors know that. They are equivalent to 2.69% enemy forces, and that will be added in after the fact. So there will be a couple of runs that do not hit 100%. The Pride timings may end up being impacted just a little bit, but the competitors are aware.
Yeah, it's possible to just skip the villagers, right? You could just skip the first one, right? And then pull a bunch of trash that doesn't include a villager. Those villagers are already pretty nasty mobs to be fighting. They're not particularly efficient in terms of the amount of count they give for how much damage you have to deal to them. They do give you a nice tranquility when you kill them. That's nice. But they do a lot of nasty casts. If you're trying to make 40% trash in a single pull, or 38% or whatever to only spawn 1 Pride, I think it probably should not include a villager. But there's a lot of mobs that are just kind of off doing their own thing in some pools somewhere that you don't really pull in live keys that I imagine would get tagged in as part of a big MDI pull at the start of the dungeon. I don't know. We'll see. That's the kind of thing that I'm really excited to see in our very first ever Mist of Tirna Scithe in the MDI.
Let's do it. The winner's moving on into the upper bracket to face off against Echo. Loser drops down to the lower bracket. So let's see it. Game number 3 right now between Golden Guardians and does Gargoyle stream?
All right, so let's see what comps they're playing. Looks like we see the Mage and the Moonkin here for Golden Guardians, while we see the Hunter and the Mage again for Das Gargoyle stream. So very interesting to see that Hunter and that Moonkin again. And a huge pull coming in by both of the teams, as both of them actually also use their offensive CDs as well. Double villagers here. We see the full moon unfortunately proccing on one of the off targets. Oh, how unfortunate.
You do hate to see that. On the other hand, at least you got a full moon in your Convoke. That can't be. You can't complain too much about that, right? It's not a guaranteed thing, right? It's maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But yeah, Golden Gargoyles or Golden Guardians rather, just shredding this first pull as that last villager. I was completely mistaken. They're actually going to pull 2 villagers with this first pull, make it look easy, not a problem at all, and that is going to get them a huge injection of count right at the start of the dungeon. Not 20% yet, though, so they still haven't spawned their very first Pride, as they are now going to use that Imprison to get past the next set of mobs here. We've got Mind Soothe coming out, followed by... Okay, yeah, so they're going to Mind Soothe, and then they're going to use the Night Fae to get into this little mushroom patch. This has several different mushrooms, Tasty Tough Shrooms, which give you 10% stamina, or Savory Stat Shrooms, which give you 10% stats. And the 10% stats, 10% main stat, tends to usually be a little bit more valuable. So you'll see everybody picking up one of those. They are going to mind control the inspired mob here, and it's going to go and just turn its back here and get hit for a lot of damage. They need to make sure they break the mind control before it dies so they can actually tag it and get count from it. And yeah, you can see there's that mind control break. That thing is going to have a huge amount of threat on JB, but it's going to die very quickly, and then the interrupts are going to come out. So that's going to get them a nice little hit of free count at the cost of kind of sitting there AFK for 15 seconds. And now they're going to go in to these 2 bow breakers. These mobs are nasty. Once they get pushed below 50% health, they will do a little tantrum cast that does a lot of damage to your whole group. If you push both of them at the same time, that can do a lot of damage in a live key setting. Of course, in the MDI, these teams are able to handle it. As you can see, Power Word Barrier going to be coming down to help make that group damage a little bit more manageable for Golden Guardians.
So interesting to see that they chose to do the mind control on Golden Guardian side, while Dusk Gargoyle Stream just ended up using the cage from the Demon Hunter to see the inspired Soul Cleaver and deal with the rest of the mobs. So we'll see which strategy ended up being better, because of course mind controlling means you have to be AFK for a little while, losing a little bit of time, but they get the extra percentage from the mob, while Gargoyle Stream is just cleaving down the Soul Cleaver now with that Pride. So I would say theoretically Dusk Gargoyle Stream does have the faster strat, but realistically, they're not on the boss yet, while Golden Guardians are. And one more thing to note is that Golden Guardians did save the Bloodlust, so they will have it available for this boss, while Dusk Gargoyle Stream used it on the very first pull, so they have to finish off this boss without Bloodlust. Now, it is tyrannical, so it can actually be decently difficult to one-phase this boss on an 18. So we will see how much damage those teams can do to the boss once they finish off the ad and get the damage on Ingra.
Yeah, this boss with Tyrannical active, it can take several more phases than if Fortified were instead the affix. Especially, you don't have enough to kill it in your first cooldowns, and then it starts really taking a long time. As you can see here, we're just about to get into that push for Gargoyle. They're actually going to get that Fear cast before they push Droman below 20% health, where he becomes friendly for a time, and he applies a damage taken increase to Ingra Malik, the main boss. That is what's going to be stacked up with Combustion, Elysian Decree, Resonating Arrow. All of these cooldowns are going to come out at the same time. Weapons of Order, huge burst damage being popped by Gargoyle. Only able to get Ingra Malik to about 50% health. 50% health-ish is fine here. They should be able to get it on the next go. It's really important that you don't have 3 phases. 3 phases would be very slow, but yeah, you can see Golden Guardians with all the advantages we talked about, they were able to get Ingra Malik down here to about 20% before the damage taken reduction gets removed from it, and they're just going to tunnel boss. That is what their strategy is going to be. It's just full damage on boss. They're not going to get another Droman phase. This is important you get this done in time. If you miscalculate here, the boss is going to apply an 80% damage reduction after a time, and if that happens, then things get really, really slow. So hopefully they're able to kill it prior to that Embrace Darkness cast going out. If that does happen too early, then they'll be in a lot of trouble. I think they're going to be in time here, though.
Yeah, and we can see the difference in damage here as well for this boss specifically. Moonkin very strong for this boss because of that, because of the cooldowns, huge amounts of burst damage with the Celestial Alignment, and the Convoke as well. As Yoda did switch to Night Fae now, he played Kyrian previously. Night Fae just provides a lot more single target damage compared to the Kyrian, which provides more AoE damage. So definitely well done with the choice of Covenants here to make sure they get this boss done in one cast. But they do get the damage reduction, it looks like. This is really bad for Golden Guardians here. They just barely didn't have enough damage to finish up the boss.
Yeah, you can see this thing is just taking forever to kill now. It would have been a much better decision to kill the Droman instead, who's already incidentally gotten cleaved down to 60% health or so, and should keep going down now for Golden Guardians. As this phase starts to get quite nasty, they're going to use a Battle Res on Shakib. Ice Block coming out for Lip, but yeah, the Embrace Darkness, not only a damage reduction, it's also doing a lot of nasty things to the group as fears start now getting spammed by the boss, and this is really the boss saying, hey, you should really kill that tree, as JB is trying to keep himself alive. 50% mana and health on JB, so he's got enough mana to keep them going for the rest of this fight. But yeah, Ingra Malik's health is just not moving, as Gargoyle are also having to do a 3rd phase on the boss. Ingra Malik finally goes down for Golden Guardians as Cauterize is procced by Lip, so they're able to escape here a little bit faster than Gargoyle, but that did not look clean from either team. I'm sure both teams had a different thing in mind when they envisioned how that fight was going to go.
Definitely, yeah. It looks like Golden Guardians really were counting on this one phase, with the Bloodlust being saved for this fight specifically, the Moonkin in the group as well, just having this burst single target comp, and it really just didn't work out exactly the way they wanted, but they still managed to finish off the boss, having to use this one rest though, so they're down 1 battle rest. They can release though because they have the Night phase, so they managed to unlock that graveyard there, that spawn point, so they can get back there immediately. And now we are in the maze. So now we'll see how those players play the maze. So for the tournament integrity, the way it works is that both of the teams will have the exact same maze, but they don't know the maze beforehand. So they still have to do the odd one out game here, so they'll still have to figure out the correct way, but both of the teams will have the same one.
Yeah, so this is a very cool little game that you play in the maze here that's also replicated on the boss. There are going to be 4 symbols that you can identify by walking next to those little pillars next to the mist walls. And of those 4 symbols, each of them has 3 different characteristics, right? They have a shape, they're either full or empty, and they have a circle around them or they don't. And each of those characteristics, there's going to be one that is unique. So there might be 1 leaf and 3 flowers. There might be 1 empty shape and 3 full ones. And whichever is that one is always the correct path to go or the correct ad to kill during the boss here. As you can see, they're able to identify that pretty quickly. It's actually pretty punishing if you identify the wrong one. If you try to walk through a wall that's incorrect, you get sent back to the very beginning of the maze, which is a serious time loss. So I'm looking forward to the first time we get to see that in the MDI. Hopefully for these teams, it won't be in this match, but I am hoping we get to see it sometime. It would be quite funny.
Yeah, one thing to note about this maze is that you cannot actually open the door until you're out of combat. So even if you know the correct way, you still can't move on until you're done fighting the trash pack, or you somehow else manage to get out of combat, like we see the Shadow Melts coming in by the Golden Guardians here. One more thing to mention is that Moonkins are probably the very best class to deal or to figure out the maze, because they can cast while moving when they have Stellar Drift, the talent. So whenever you have Starfall up, you can cast and move around at the same time, while everyone else is losing damage, right? Your Disc Priest is going to lose damage if he has to move around. Of course, the melees want to be in melee range to do damage, and the mage is losing damage as well. So having that Moonkin, actually a little bit of a time save here as well, because the Moonkin can just walk around, figure out the symbols, and then figure out the path, while on the other side we have Dusk Gargoyle Stream, who don't really have that Moonkin or that class that doesn't lose any damage from moving around. So a little bit of a damage gain for Golden Guardians here by having the Moonkin.
And it looks like something may have bugged with the maze for Gargoyle Stream here, such that it's not going to be possible for them to complete the maze. And that, I believe, is potentially going to be a remake here of this second game, unfortunately, based on what's happened there. I'm not 100% sure on that. We'll have to see if that ends up coming through. But yeah, this maze section, it's a brutally difficult one if you get the wrong pathing. If you get the right pathing, it can be quick and easy. So it's a huge amount of variance from run to run. These teams have to be ready to deal with whatever it throws at them, because, of course, they don't know what the maze is going to be going into the run. For both teams, it's going to be the same, but it's not always the same from run to run, of course. And there is the teleport back.
They did take the wrong one.
Was that them using the wrong maze?
I think so. I don't think this was intended, actually. I think they actually just took the wrong one.
Oh, no. Okay, yeah, so it looks like the remake is coming through. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right. We're gonna be going to a remake for it. Unfortunately, there is a bug with the maze causing it to just make it so you cannot progress whatsoever. And for our rules, if there are these bugs that are occurring that are the fault of the game, that they're not able to continue the dungeon, they're not able to continue to progress, it will result in triggering a remake. So we're gonna be getting all the characters reset, give everybody a moment to be able to kind of put it all together, but let's start looking at what we've been seeing so far here, Tettles, out of just at least the opening of the dungeon.
I mean, there was a lot of really good stuff that we saw prior to the maze section itself. I mean, the first half of this dungeon and that first section before the first boss is always the most tedious. Like, the double villager pull is very, very scary. And then you did see Golden Guardians, I feel like, was a little bit risky of an assessment for them to say that we can burn Ingram Malloc at 25% on Tyrannical. You saw, like, because the boss...
I've seen some groups that do that.
I mean, it may still have been faster, right? Like, they were able to get through it and they didn't have to kill that tree. So I don't know. It was maybe a good call.
I mean, they're playing a boomkin solely because of it. I'm pretty sure it's not faster.
I think you just blame that on bad Convoke RNG, and you're pretty excited to get a second shot at landing some
he got
full
the full
moons
moon
there.
on the first one, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So yeah.
If he gets a moon on the second one, it's all over.
I was gonna say that they've practiced it to such an extent that they got to know that, you know, the different variables of what can happen if they have to muscle through it at different times, and they did well. I mean, they almost died, but I like seeing the positioning as well for some of the fear bombs that were coming out, doing a good job to make sure they weren't getting kind of like backed into any sort of corner and then just getting any of the puddles splashed on top of them or anything. So
I love the mind control technology. I thought that was really cool. Emceeing the
but
inspiring
was it faster?
I don't know,
thought it was cool
probably
as well,
not.
but it probably wasn't even faster.
I would wager it's probably not, but it's cool.
It was
I mean,
cool
that mob
though,
is
yeah.
really annoying though, because that mob applies a buff to itself that makes it so it like leeches on auto attacks, and that can make it so that it really lasts a long time if you're not careful. So having it just get killed by the other mobs in that pack, that's a pretty big win-win. I think what Gargoyle did with that as well, of keeping it CC'd and then killing it with Pride and then killing Pride with Boss, that kind of chain pull of a bunch of stuff that you can't really pull a lot of stuff with, but you can kind of do each of them with the second half of the next one. You know, that kind of strategy looked like it was also really fast. So I think that both teams are going to be really excited to get another shot at that first boss and try and do it faster, because I think that there's probably time to be saved for each team if that goes a little bit more according to plan.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things is tensions running high, maybe a bit of nerves, especially for, the side of Gargoyle, right, Nagura, because they're often a lot more new to this competition. They've got to be really excited to kind of get that second chance back and just hope for a much cleaner run.
Definitely. I mean, they've been playing really clean the second game, and now having that second chance for this dungeon, I really think it's just gonna get the nerves off a little, because you always know when the first key you play is going to be a little bit chaotic and you need to warm up, right? And so having an extra chance on this dungeon might actually just give them the edge and just make them play a little bit better than they did last time. Maybe not make any of those mistakes on the first pull that they did. So we'll see how it goes for them this time around. And hopefully the Golden Guardians not making the same mistake again by not proccing a full moon on the first boss. I mean, come on, Yoda.
Tails, do you have any guide updates for that? Able to help them with their problems?
None to be had. Although I did see his trees accidentally getting launched into like the middle of nowhere during the burn, but we've all been there. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like the issue was that like it wasn't necessarily just the Convoke RNG, but once the boss does put that shield up, he starts pulsing insane AoE damage, and we saw them Lip caught it and was like, are they about to wipe right here? I actually was worried that they were about to wipe at the very end.
Well, yeah, that's one of the scariest things as well from that boss fight, and even from like a priest perspective that you're going into it, is people just get spread out all over the place from the fears. Any of the different puddles on the ground start kind of separating everybody. So next thing you know, I mean, everybody starts in the middle of the room or something like that, or you have melee who are kind of tucked into that cubby where the bosses are starting at, and then the next thing you know, you guys are on opposite sides of the room. Mage is cauterizing, you're about to die yourself, and then you're just trying to scramble to be able to put everything together. So
you try to life grip your friend out of the danger.
Yeah, there we go. The life
and then
grip
they have
tech.
the
There
neural
it
silencer on because you killed them with life grip 5 times during raid. You gripped them off the edge or whatever, and so that doesn't work, and it's all a disaster. It spirals out of control from there. Yeah, we've all been there.
Need that grip conduit to be able to help them out as well. Yeah, but if you guys just tuned in, there was a bug with the Mist of Tirna side dungeon for one of the teams on the Gargoyle side. So we're getting it reset, we're getting the remake rolling, and we're going to make sure we're getting everybody everything they need so we can start it up again. So again, first bosses were both dead. We're dead for both of those teams, and they were just going to have to deal with the maze, and it's going to be a random maze for both of the teams, but they're going to follow the same route. So they don't exactly know what to plan for. They're going to have a lot of adjustments as well with the Gormlings and all the massive pulls possible at the end, Titles.
Yeah, the pulls at the end I think are going to come down to making sure that they can get kicks allocated on as many of those worms as they possibly can. There's like a big shield and a large heal. I'm pretty sure that they can only pull 2 of those guys at a time. So I do think that there are like 3 packs that they can merge together after they do like, I think they're probably going to skip the 3 mobs straight after Mistcaller, and then they're going to grab the right landing pack and then like pull like up and to the left, if that makes any sense. and then they're
makes sense to me, Titles.
Plant right there and be able to DPS down all the mobs very rapidly.
You have a whiteboard, don't you? Can you like draw us a map really
What about the inspiring mobs?
Okay,
what about the inspiring?
Hey!
My whiteboard is preoccupied with something else right now, but we're currently showing the intro to
Thankfully,
Mists.
we moved away from your... Oh, there it is.
See, this is the current state of the whiteboard, but
Absolutely
I like it.
love it.
Yeah, you
Let's
can
see
see
that
that
Balance
balance
Druid.
Druid.
Don't get us nerfed.
Let's see that
Socks are
Balance
rough,
Druid
but-
on display. Hoping for the big Convoke. The remake of Game 3 is now underway, decided between Golden Guardians and does Gargoyle stream.
Yeah, and both teams now getting that big first pull underway once again. This worked out nicely for each of them the first time. So they are going to try and replicate the success they had with this pull, and maybe for Gargoyle even shave a little bit more time here. Last time I think I remember Golden Guardians finishing this pull more quickly, but this time it looks like Gargoyle... okay, so Gargoyle have to pull in this mob later, whereas Golden Guardians were able to somehow do it with the other mobs, even though it has that inspiring aura around it. And I believe that is how Golden Guardians have shaved a couple seconds off this pull relative to Gargoyle.
Yeah, that's exactly what makes their pull a little bit faster here in Golden Guardians. They just don't care about that inspired mob. They just nuke it all down at the same time. Well, the Gargoyle stream plays it a little bit slower, or safer rather, by just seeing that inspired mobs, or at least not pulling it in. Didn't see SSC there, but just not grouping it up with the rest of the trash to make sure they still have the CC on everything and making it a little bit easier for them. So now they grabbed the mushrooms here with the Night Fae ability that enables this area here. And now we see the mind control again, used by JB here on that priest, making sure the soul cleaver goes down. And these trash mobs are actually incredibly dangerous for the tank, because not only do they do debuff on the tank that increases your damage taken, but it also does a huge initial damage as well that casts, and as you mentioned before, also has the debuff on himself that he heals on auto attacks. So definitely very dangerous mobs. And you also have the casters who randomly cast soul bolts on your group, which also can cause some issues, especially if the bolts go on the same person. So can instantly one-shot a player if two of the casts go through on the same guy.
There are those tantrums which they're going to use the barrier for on the side of Golden Gargoyle, or Golden Guardians, as Gargoyle does it as well. Man, I've been saying Golden Gargoyle a lot today. That is these two teams need to not play each other anymore. This is really pretty rough. As Gargoyle are a little bit faster actually in getting it to the boss, I believe, as Golden Guardians are just about ready to pull here. Once they finish off these last two mobs, they have that pride which they are going to skip. Okay, but Gargoyle has to kill that pride, right? Guardian's actually also pulling the Pride. Okay, so they're Pride onto boss, whereas Gargoyle is killing Pride with the Inspiring mob instead before they go onto boss. This is where Golden Guardians, again, saving a little bit more time by finding ways to deal with the Inspiring mob, not by itself. We saw it with the first pull, the way that they were able to pull rather than CCing the Inspiring mob. And here they were able to just mind control it to get it killed right at the start of the pull, rather than having to imprison it and then kill it later at the end of the pull. That's going to get them onto this boss even more quickly. Going to make sure they have pride here as JP can drop so low.
Yeah, that was actually so close, but didn't manage to finish off the Pride mob here. And one nice thing to see as well was that JB managed to get a very quick mana drink off right before they pulled this boss, because he was just spamming his drink basically, and when the mob went down, he could sit down and drink, because the Pride mob spawns right after, of course, as they hit 20% trash, and you get incumbent immediately again as soon as somebody engages that Pride mob. But he did manage to just sit down for a couple of seconds to get that extra mana that he needed to heal that Pride on the boss, and now he's got the Pride buff, which regens the mana. So let's see if they can have the damage this time around, as they have the Bloodlust used, and the Celestial Alignment, and the Convoke being popped, and there's a full moon! Good job, Yoda, well done. See? He learned. And this time they're going to be making the damage for sure with that full moon coming in by the Moonkin.
Yeah, Ingram Malik here is going to be at about 23% when it loses the damage taken increase. They should be able to nuke it down here. Last time it was only a matter of 3% that separated them from a much faster kill. So with a little bit more damage this time, I think they're going to be in good shape. And yeah, it may have well come down to that full moon that Yoda landed during the Convoke that time. You know, that thing does a lot of damage. You can look at the damage meters right now. Yoda is just so high up there as a result of the strength of that Convoke lining up with the damage taken increase.
Yeah, but it looks like they're playing it safe, because I'm pretty sure the last time they came out of this phase, I think the boss was also approximately at 20%. So it looks like they're just choosing to kill the at this time, just playing it safe. And I think this is a wise decision, because not even the full moon managed to get them low enough on that boss's HP. So they just decide to play it safe, finish off the Droman again, and then they definitely are going to have enough damage. Well, that's Gargoyle Stream, on the other hand, since they don't have the huge amount of single target burst as Golden Guardians have, they definitely have to kill the Domin again, as they just did. They now have the intermission phase again, but on 70%, they should be fine. Like 17% definitely seems like a percentage they can use to finish off the boss. So definitely don't need a third phase on their side.
Yeah, Golden Guardians, meanwhile, making their way to the maze after killing that first boss. They are going to grab a little bit of extra trash from the side here, pulling it in over the wall into this pull, making it a little bit less inefficient to fight those two mobs by themselves. But this does add quite a bit of difficulty to the pull, as you now have those rampages knocking back all your melee players. Pretty rough spot to be in. As you can see Gargoyle just finishing off that first boss just in time to beat that damage reduction phase.
I feel so bad for Shakib, just can't be in front, can't be in the back. They're storming everywhere. He's just getting knocked into the air here and there. It's really not nice for melee players having the storming affix here on top of having all of the other trash abilities as well that you need to be careful about. So Shakib doing a good job staying alive as they're moving on in the maze. They do use a cage on this inspired mob. And as we mentioned before, the maze is random, so they have to play the maze properly with the odd one out. They have to figure out which one the correct door is to move on. But both of the teams are going to have the exact same maze, so they still have to play it, but it's not going to be unfair because both of the teams have the same one.
Yeah, this area with these storming tornadoes, you can see, even for their range players, pretty brutal. This combination of affix was chosen by you, the viewers, over on the @WoW Esports Twitter. A poll was ran for this dungeon, and these two affixes were the champions up against several other options. So all of this misery that's being inflicted upon the Golden Guardians here from these storming tornadoes, it really is all your fault, this watching. Everybody that voted in that poll causing this pain for Shakib. So don't worry, I'm sure he doesn't carry a grudge, yeah.
All right, so it looks like both of the teams are actually very, very even at this point. We see both of them dealing with that inspired mob here that both of the teams did this CC while they were fighting the rest of the trash, and now they're finishing it off by itself. Golden Guardians slightly ahead. Looks like they took the
failed
wrong...
the maze.
Yes, Golden Guardians. Oh no, this is the second time they're failing the maze. Hopefully they do manage to find the correct way this time. Looks like this is it. They didn't manage to find a way. But this is not good. If they're gonna make mistakes like this is gonna cost them valuable time. So they want to make sure they're not making any more of those mistakes on the maze.
I think I may have seen that happening for Gargoyle as well, just briefly before we went full screen here on Golden Guardian. So yeah, the maze is actually turning out to be, when there's so much healing and damage and stuff going on, there's so little brain power left to use on the puzzle that is not enough left over for them, as they're going to meld to drop combat so that they can get through to the next section of the maze and then tag this pride and bring it into this next pull so that they can keep the prideful buff in this area. And this maze in particular is so different than any other thing we've ever seen in the MDI. The hugely random nature of it means that these teams need to be ready to react to so many different ways they could get through the maze. And making a snap decision about, okay, we're going to meld here, and then we're actually going to tag that pride and bring it into the next pull after we've opened the door. That is the sort of thing that it's really hard to have a good idea of what you want to do with those different pride spawns in all these different places. Making that decision quickly and making the right decision is going to be hugely rewarded. As you can see, they do get that pride buff now into this Toad mini boss. The Toad, one of 3 mini bosses you can encounter in different rooms in this maze. Probably one of the easier ones compared to the Dragon or the Hydra, which can both be quite nasty for the tank. This one leaps around a little bit, but relatively easy to dodge.
Yeah, one more thing to mention about this maze is the fact that in the MDI, they're speedrunning the dungeons. They want to run the dungeon as quickly as possible and want to deal with the trash as fast as they can. But this maze takes a decent amount of time for you to run to each symbol, making sure you know where the exit is. So if you kill the trash incredibly quickly, you might actually not have the time to find the correct way. And then maybe you're rushing it and you're taking the wrong one, which we've already seen happen for Golden Guardians here. So killing the trash incredibly fast might not actually be the best way to deal with this maze, because what's the point killing everything instantly when you then have to walk around and find the exit? Then you might as well just save one of the cooldowns for the next trash group. So you're not basically wasting the time having to find the exit, and you can find it while the mobs are dying.
Yeah, that is absolutely something that can be helpful. But theoretically, it is slower than just doing it right perfectly and quickly. And that's always what these teams are going to aspire to do, right? They're always going to try and make it work the most difficult but fastest way. And even if that doesn't work out for them, even if they have to try it 100 times before they get it down, they will keep on trying to make that happen, because that's the kind of the champion attitude of teams like Golden Guardians here, who actually have an unfortunate double stun coming out from one of those boasts, hitting both of their melee players. Just when they thought the storming was over and they could relax a little bit in melee, one of their group mates just brutally murders them with the with the boast from the Pride.
Yeah, so it looks like they're just some of them even getting stunned as they were running around here. Did manage to find the exit, it looks like. Never mind,
no!
It was the wrong one again. So they will have to go back and find the correct... Yeah, see, this is the thing, right? They're going around trying to find the exit, but because they have to deal with the Pride at the same time and having to dodge all of those debuffs, making sure... JB has to heal the group, right? He can't just walk around freely looking for the exit when he just needs to heal everyone, making sure everyone stays alive. So yeah, just not finding the correct exit here, unfortunately. Now they did it as they're moving on to the boss here. Mistcaller, the third boss. Looks like the other team has some issues, so we'll see how we're going to be proceeding with that one. They will tell us shortly, but we now see Golden Guardians engaging Mistcaller. Mistcaller, definitely a boss that you can't necessarily speed up as much, just because the boss has this intermission phase where you play the same game as in the maze. You have those 4 ads spawning, and you need to kill the correct one, depending on the odd one out. So you just have to find the unique symbol, and that is that you need to kill.
Leaf. Yeah, that's over here. So
there
are 3 full symbols
and
1 empty, and that's the one that is the correct one to make sure you kill, yeah.
Yeah, and it's percentage based, this intermission phase. So that means you basically just have to play this phase 3 times. There's one thing theoretically that the last intermission phase that happens, I believe, at 5% of the boss. So in theory, you could nuke the boss before the cast goes through, but that is very unlikely that that's possible on a tyrannical key. Maybe on Fortified, if you just save a bunch of burst damage and you get lucky with the cast sequence that the boss is doing, which would save you a huge amount of time if you can dodge that last intermission phase, but it's just not going to be possible on tyrannical.
With a comp like this, it's maybe one of the best comps. So I think it starts at 10% is when the cast starts, and you need to kill it before the cast finishes. Yeah. But you have a Windwalker with Touch of Death, Power Word, Fortitude. Maybe they pop Fort Brew. Maybe they can get up to a nice big Touch of Death from all of that HP that they can get, and then you maybe you dump your Convoke into it as well at the same time. And maybe if you do all of that, you could maybe, just maybe, push it from 10 to 0 before the guessing game cast finishes. Maybe you could even wait to push it to 10% until it's in the middle of another cast, so that you can get even a little bit of extra damage time on it. All of that seems like it's probably difficult to get reliable. It's probably better to just do the boss and do an extra set of ads, but maybe we'll see teams try and get fancy with that.
I mean, yeah, it's possible. I do think that would be more of a fortified strat, though, because if you save all of your CDs for this moment specifically, and then you don't make it, then you waste a lot of time, right? Just using all of your cooldowns right before the boss dies. Then you don't have your CDs ready for the next trash pack and so on. So we'll see if a team wants to do that. But I do think it's going to be a pretty huge time save, especially for this dungeon specifically, because as you mentioned, this is going to be a dungeon where lots of, it's not very difficult in itself, which will cause MDI teams to just try insane pulls, try big pulls here and there, and just add more and more things to the pulls and make it riskier to get a little bit of an edge here and there. And doing something like this with Mistcaller really seems exactly like something that we would see on the MDI. So we'll see if that's something we do in the future. But this time we didn't see it for the Golden Guardians as they're playing this third intermission phase.
Yeah, I think it's probably just a little bit too much health to be feasible. It definitely on Tyrannical, but I think even on Fortified, it's going to be tough. But it's certainly something that I expect these teams will have experimented with and will have tried using all their cooldowns to skip that last phase. As Mistcaller does go down for Golden Guardians, they'll be making their way now to the final trash segment of the dungeon. There's 63% count right now. They're going to need to get quite a bit of this trash from the end of the dungeon. What they can do is pull the 80% pride, kill that, get the pride buff, kill the last boss, and then they can go and finish off the rest of their count if they wanted to. By doing that, they would avoid having to kill that last pride afterwards as well, without even having to do a skip of some kind. Looks like it's going to be slow fall, though, used here to allow Lighty to just skip over that pack entirely. And the entire team is going to skip that first 3-pack. That 3-pack is usually pretty easy, but it doesn't include that mob that you need to kick. And so if you're going to pull it with other stuff, that can really add extra difficulty to your run.
It really can. And we just wanted to give you guys a quick update as we're going through this. As, of course, Does Gargoyle Stream has been encountering that bug with the maze on Mist Tirna Scithe. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to allow Golden Guardians to be able to complete their run, make sure that they get it all finished up. And we're going to count it more as a time trial. And then we're going to make sure Does Gargoyle Stream will be able to compete off broadcast, be able to complete their run, and then we'll have a winner based off of the best of those 2 times. So unfortunately, won't be head-to-head, but we want to make sure that both competitors are going to be able to see their runs through to completion. So we'll be watching Golden Guardians complete their run, and then our admins will be monitoring Gargoyle Stream's run as well, and we'll be able to see who moves on from there. So we'll watch the rest of our Golden Guardians game right here, and then be moving on to the next series afterwards.
All right, well, unfortunate that we see this bug happen again for Gargoyles, but definitely a good decision. So Golden Guardians did not encounter the same thing, so they just fairly managed to finish off this dungeon here, and we're gonna watch them. They're having a really good run so far, right? I mean, this is gonna be hard for Gargoyles to beat that time off stream once they do their key, but looking at Golden Guardians, this is going to be incredibly hard to beat, as they have a perfect run here, right? We have the 0 deaths. They spawned that 4th pride now. We're up to 81% trash, so they only have to do the last boss. And maybe they do the last boss with the pride, as you mentioned before, but doesn't look like it because there's still some trash in between, unless they somehow want to skip this one. It's possible that they also pull some trash on top of the boss, right? That might be a thing, considering that they have the pride buff here, and they also have Bloodlust available. So let's see what they gather up here, as Lighty is just running through the trash pack, and looks like they are pulling the boss indeed, yeah.
Yeah, you know, it is a good, impressive run from Golden Guardians in terms of how they've handled these pulls, but there is quite a bit of time available for Gargoyle. If Gargoyle can avoid having those 2 maze mishaps that happened to Golden Guardians, that could save them quite a bit of time. You know, Golden Guardians getting sent back to the start of the maze twice in this dungeon. That's probably cost them almost a minute if you add those 2 together. And that is something that Gargoyle may be able to capitalize on in their run, which they will do later, again, off broadcast, just to make sure that everything is all fair here between the 2 teams.
Yeah, looks like Golden Guardians are doing a good job finishing off this trash as well, as they're now fighting Tredova only. Tredova can be a difficult boss, but got nerfed quite a number of times actually from beta. So at this point, not as difficult anymore as it used to be, for sure.
On beta, it would predict your movement, so it would like start the swirly cast, and then you'd have to start running, and then it would like put one where you would be in 2 seconds if you kept running that same direction. So you had to like juke it and adjust your run in the middle to avoid it. But that ended up changing to the new predictive thing where it just kind of sends them out in all directions at run speed, so you can't just run in the straight direction either.
As far as I'm aware, it actually remembers how you dodged it the last time and will put a swirly there, right? So if the swirly spawns underneath you, you dodge to the left, then the next time one swirly will spawn underneath you and to the left of you, because that's how you dodged it the last time. So it will remember the way you dodged, meaning that if you're running really far away from it, then the swirlies will spawn out over all of the room. But if you only make one step to the side or one step in the front, then the swirlies will all be much more contained, and that's actually a much better strategy. Instead of mages having just blink around all over the place, and then their swirlies are just going to be covering other people's areas. So definitely an interesting ability for sure, even though it was a lot harder when it was invisible. But yeah, now we see the swirly, so easier to dodge for sure, as Shadova is down to 7% at this point. They still have to play some trash after this. It's not going to be over. They still need that 13% trash that is missing for them. And if we look at the time, I mean, above 20 minutes, and we saw some of the strategy from Das Gargoyle stream. Of course, we can't see the whole dungeon that they've been playing, since they will be doing this off stream, hopefully, just because, of course, they had the bugs, so we couldn't see their dungeon run. But it is going to be difficult for them to beat this time that Golden Guardians is setting here, because it seems incredibly clean on their side.
Yeah, this is going to be an impressive timer coming out from Golden Guardians, although I expect we will be seeing faster mist runs in the future. I think this is going to be one of the dungeons that gets sub 20 minutes at some point, as 5% more count actually needed here for Golden Guardians, although maybe they got it from their Tirna villagers. Of course, as we mentioned, sometimes those Tirna villagers aren't giving count, so yeah, that's probably what's going to stop our timer there, is actually once they reach 95% count, plus those 2 Tirna villagers that they killed right at the start, is 100, and so they are done with the dungeon. We don't know who won the series yet, though. We have to wait and see what time Gargoyle is able to put up. Luckily, it won't impact either team later today, because neither the winning team nor losing team would have any more matches to play today in day one. We'll see them again tomorrow, both teams, though.
That's right. And of course, you guys just tuned in. Does Gargoyle stream experience the bug once again with the maze? So rather than remaking for both teams, we let Golden Guardians complete their run, and we're going to have our admins take a look at Does Gargoyle stream as they do another run, and we'll be able to compare those timers. So we'll have both the official timers for you guys to be able to compare and be able to see who is going to be moving on into the upper bracket to face up against Echo, and who will be in the lower bracket for the start of tomorrow. So otherwise, Teddles, what were some of